Good morning, everyone. My topic is all about facilitating learner-centered. So, if your plan is for 1 year, plant a rice. If your plan is for 10 years, plant a tree. But if your plan is for eternity, educate children. So, first, the basic concepts of learner-centered teaching. So, there are four basic concepts. First, the strategy of teaching. Second, the method of teaching. Third, technique of teaching. And the last is the device. So, the strategy of teaching means that the art of using psychological plan in order to increase the probabilities and favorable consequences of success and to lessen chances and failure. So, second is that method of teaching. It is related and progressive acts performed. Amo ni siya ang kuan kanang sa involving sequence of steps to achieve a goal or objective. So, the third is that the technique of teaching rather, it is a skill employed by the teacher in carrying out of the procedures of act of teaching. And lastly is the device. Amo ni siya ang kuan kanang teaching aid or tool to facilitate instruction like flashcards, pictures, or slides. Next is the teacher as a corporate professional. The teacher as a corporate professional must be polished look, polished demeanor, polished language. So, polished look, it must be professional for dressing, tasteful accessories like the jewelries, bags, and shoes. So, and the makeup for female. And lastly, the personal hygiene. And the polished demeanor must be professional seat, professional walking, and the professional handshake. It is very important to the teacher. And lastly is the polished language, the voice and the gesture. So, the teacher must have a clear voice and the gesture. Next is the classification of teaching method. So, the classification of teaching method is that the traditional, time-tested, progressives, and the traditional, it must the old-fashioned of way of teaching, katong mga karaan nga mga style of teaching. The time-tested is that the test of time are still being used at present. Dapat time limit jud kung magkuan. Next is the progressive, the newer and more improved methods. Dapat mga bag-o nga methods. And it makes use of principles of learning. Utilize the principles of learning by doing, provides growth and development, liberates the learners, and stimulate thinking and reasoning. Next is the variables that affect the teaching method. The variables that affect teaching methods are the objectives, nature of students, nature of subject matter, the teacher, technology, school environment, and lastly, the teacher's knowledge of group dynamics. These variables are very important to the students and the teachers. Next is the management of instruction, which is the lesson planning. So, what is a learning objective? So, a learning objective is a statement of what students will be able to do when they are complete instruction. So, the learning objective has three major components. First is that a description of what the students will be able to do. Second is that the conditions under which the student will perform the task rather. And lastly, the criteria of evaluating students' performance. So, next is what is the difference between a goal and a learning objective. So, the difference between the goal and the learning objective is that a goal is a statement describes a more global learning outcome, while a learning objective is a statement of one of several specific performance, the achievements of which contributes to attainment of the goal. So, for example, The goal of learning assessment course is to enable the students to develop an appropriate multiple choices question. It is that to measure students' achievement. Another example is that given the discrimination and difficulty indices of an item, the student will be able to determine if the item contributes to the reliability of the exam. So, next is the why our learning objectives are important. Learning objectives are important because of the selection of content. So, mo-select jud sila og content para naa sila i-discuss that time. Second is that the development of an instructional strategy. Third is that development and selection of instructional materials. So, it is very important that the teacher must select instructional materials so that the learners will learn in another activity. Last is the construction of tests and other instruments for assessing and evaluating the learning outcomes. So, ang teacher muhatag jud sang construction of tests like true or false, multiple choices, or matching type. So, and last is the how do you write a learning objective. How do you write a learning objective? So, in writing a learning objective, first, we will focus the performance of the students, not the performance of the teacher. Second, focus on the product, not the process. Third, focus on terminal behavior, not a subject matter. So, in this part, mo focus gud ta sa mga behavior sa students, dili ra sa subject. So, and lastly is to include only one general learning outcome in an objective. So, in every subject, we must have a general learning of the students, which is the objective. Next is a learning objective is a statement describing a competency or performance capability to be acquired by the learning. Next is the checklist for writing a specific instructional objective. So, the first checklist is that begin each statement of a specific learning outcome with a verb that specifies definite observable behavior. Second is that make sure that each statement meets all three of the criteria for a good learning objectives. And lastly is that be sure to include complex objectives like, for example, the problem solving when they are appropriate. There are the three characteristics of essential to ensuring clear statements of objectives, which are the behavior, criterion, condition. So, the behavior is that the student will be able to compute the standard deviation. The criterion is that the number computed will be correct. Next and last will be the guides to writing learning objectives. So, educators and psychologists concerned with learning theory have given considerable thought to the various types of learning that take place in school. So, the objective is the taxonomy of education. So, the taxonomy provides a consistent means of developing the single most powerful tool instruction and assessment of the student learning. So, the taxonomy distinguishes the three major, which is the cognitive domain, the psychomotor domain, and the lastly is the affective domain. So, the cognitive domain is that primary concern in higher education. So, if we assume that faculty is more concerned with process and problem solving activities, then the categories of the taxonomy are most valuable in suggestion various kinds of behavior to use as objectives. So, next domain will be discussed by another reporter. That would be all. Thank you.